Welcome back to the deep dive. We are really glad you're here today because we are going to do something a little bit, well, a little bit dangerous.
Dangerous is a good word for it.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to take a concept that lives in the absolute deepest, most comfortable part of your brain, a concept you probably think you have completely figured out, and we're going to entirely dismantle it.
It's one of those words, isn't it? Like one of those foundational blocks of reality that we use 10 times a day without ever really inspecting what it means.
Exactly. The word is good, just good. If I stopped 100 people on the street right now and asked them, what does it mean to be a good person? Or what is goodness? I would bet my house on the answers I'd get.
Oh, absolutely. You'd hear things like kindness, generosity,
Uh,
helping an old lady cross the street.
Giving a coin to a beggar in the morning, being polite to the barista. It's this very soft, warm, fuzzy idea. It's the nice guy definition. Goodness essentially equals being harmless.
Right, it's a passive virtue. In that definition, you are quote-unquote good mostly because of what you don't do.
Yeah.
You don't hurt people, you don't steal, you don't cause a scene at the grocery store.
But today, we are diving into a stack of source material that takes that definition, crumbles it up, and throws it right out the window.
It really does.
We are looking at the theological and rationalist framework of the scholar Ghulam Ahmad Pervez. And let me tell you, his definition of goodness, specifically the Quranic term care, is going to sound absolutely radical to a lot of our listeners.
It is a complete structural shift. I mean, we aren't talking about being nice anymore. In this framework, goodness is synonymous with power. It is synonymous with autonomy.
Power and autonomy. That doesn't sound like charity.
Yeah.
That sounds like architecture.
And that is exactly the metaphor we need today. We are moving away from a mystic or purely ritualistic understanding of religion.
Right.
The idea that you just chant something and you're magically saved. We're stepping into what Pervez calls a rationalist Quranic framework. The sources we're analyzing today, which include his extensive lectures on Surah al-Baqarah, specifically verses 104 to 107, and his writings on the psychology of the self. They paint a picture of the human being not as a passive servant, but as an architect.
An architect of their own soul. That is the distinct vibe I got reading through this. The central premise here is that the purpose of life isn't just obedience for the sake of obedience.
No, not at all.
It isn't about bowing down because you're scared of lightning. It is about the construction of a self, or a zot.
A zot that is so strong, so integrated, and so autonomous that it can actually survive the physical disintegration of the body.
That was the aha moment for me. The idea that survival after death isn't guaranteed by magic. It's not a participation trophy for just showing up to life. It's guaranteed by the structural integrity of your personality.
Exactly.
If you build a house of straw, it blows away. If you build a house of brick, it stands.
Precisely. And that is the mission of this deep dive today. We are going to explore this architecture of autonomy, and we have a lot to get through because this framework touches on absolutely everything.
It really does. So to give everyone a roadmap, here's how we're going to break this down.
Yeah.
We're going to start with the foundation, the psychological definitions, what actually is care, which is good, and what is shar, which is evil in this framework. Spoiler alert, evil isn't just sinning. It's essentially a mental health crisis of the soul.
Yeah, that part is fascinating. Then we're going to move into some heavy theological deconstruction.
Oh, yeah.
The sources go into immense detail about why we need to stop believing in folklore. We are going to look specifically at the story of the fallen angels, Harut and Marut, and why the source basically calls that story total nonsense.
That segment is wild. I didn't realize how much that specific myth had influenced culture. From there, we have to tackle the great controversy of abrogation, or Nosk, the idea that God changes his mind and cancels out previous verses. Our source material has a very strong, very controversial take on that.
That is the intellectual core of the argument. If you get that wrong, the whole system just collapses.
And finally, we will look at the big picture, the evolution of guidance. Why did humanity need detailed instructions in the past, like Noah building the ark? And why does this framework suggest we are now in the adulthood of the human race?
And of course, we will end with the ultimate goal, the hereafter. But not the hereafter you might be picturing.
No, definitely not. It is a lot to unpack. But if we want to understand the building, we have to look at the bricks. Let's start with part one, the architecture of the self.
Let's do it.
I want to go back to that word care. In the source text, Pervez points out that in Urdu, and often in English translations, we translate care as good or charity. Like I said earlier, giving a few bucks to someone on the street. Why is that translation insufficient? What are we missing there?
We're missing the root. And in Arabic, the root is everything. The source explains that linguistically, care shares a root with the word ikhtiyar. Yes, and ikhtiyar means choice. It means authority. It means autonomy. So when the source text talks about kar, or goodness, it isn't talking about a passive act of soft benevolence. It is talking about any law, any principle, or any code of conduct that builds strength in the personality.
Strength. Okay, that is a very different metric than niceness.
It is specifically istekam, stability, solidity. The argument Pervez is making is that the human personality, the zat, isn't a given. You aren't just born with a fully formed soul that's ready for eternity.
Right?
It is something that needs to be built. It is a construction project. And ka is the material you use to build it. It represents the acquisition of power, not power over other people, mind you. That's tyranny. This is power over oneself.
That distinction is key.
Yeah.
We aren't talking about political power or physical strength. We are talking about self-mastery. The source says the objective of following divine law is to become a Sahi Ikhtiyar wa Irada. That sounds almost like a royal title. Can you break that phrase down?
It's a beautiful phrase. Sahid Ikhtiyar wa Irada translates to a master of choice and will. This is the ultimate goal of the rationalist framework. Think about it this way. What is God in this theology?
God is the ultimate creator, the ultimate power.
Right. But more specifically, God is the ultimate independent will. He is the only being that is truly wholly autonomous. Nothing forces God to do anything.
Okay, I follow.
Now, if humans are created with a divine spark or in a divine image, the goal of our evolution is to become more like that, to become entities that possess a firm will and the capacity to make independent, autonomous choices.
This completely flips the script on how we usually talk about religion. Usually people say religion is about surrender. I am nothing, God is everything, or I have no choice, I just follow orders. But this view says the exact opposite.
Exactly. It says religion is about empowerment. It's about empowerment through discipline. It's the difference between a wild flooding river and a hydroelectric dam.
Oh, I like that.
The wild river has energy, sure, but it's destructive, it's chaotic, it floods the village. That's raw, undirected will.
And the dam.
The dam isn't suppressing the water, it's not destroying the water, it is channeling it. It is giving it structure, pressure, and purpose. And because of that structure, that water can generate electricity. It can light up a city. That is kar. It's the channeling of human potential into a structure that creates power.
Okay, so if kar is integration, strength, and autonomy building the dam, then we have to look at the opposite. What is shar, or evil? Because usually we think of evil as sin. Lying, cheating, stealing, the usual list. But the source uses a very specific, almost medical term for it.
Yes, the source defines shar as idmilaw.
Idmilav.
It translates to disintegration.
Disintegration. That is a terrifying word when you apply it to a human soul. It sounds like something from a sci-fi horror movie.
It is terrifying, and it's meant to be. The text describes shar not necessarily as hurting someone else, though that is almost always a consequence, but primarily as something that happens to you. It is anything that causes the human personality to become diffused or split.
A split personality. Now, we need to clarify here. The source isn't talking about dissociative identity disorder. We aren't talking about a clinical psychiatric condition you'd see in a hospital.
Right. It's a moral and psychological state. The source describes it as a state of constant indecision. You know that feeling when you are torn between two desires.
Oh, absolutely. I want to be healthy, but I also want to eat this entire pizza right now.
That's a trivial example, but yes. Now scale that up. One part of you wants to do the right thing, the principled thing. Maybe it's telling the truth in a difficult meeting or standing up for someone who is being bullied. But another part of you wants safety. It wants the immediate gratification. It wants the easy way out.
Being double-minded.
Exactly. The source argues that a person consumed by shar cannot make a firm decision. They lack azm determination. Their energy is scattered. They are fighting themselves. And because they are fighting themselves, their personality cannot solidify. It remains weak, fluid, and fragile. The source uses the phrase, a diffused and disintegrative personality.
That's a powerful image. The idea that every time I act against my principles, I'm not just breaking a rule in a rule book somewhere in the sky. I'm actually chipping away at the structural integrity of myself. I'm making myself more diffused.
And a diffused self cannot survive stress. It cannot stand firm in a crisis. The integrated self, the one built on care, is like a rock. The disintegrated self is like a pile of sand. When the storm comes, the sand scatters. The source explicitly states, the integrated self stands firm, The disintegrated self crumbles.
So if you're listening to this and thinking, okay, I don't want to be a pile of sand, how do we stop the crumbling? How do we achieve this integration? The sources talk about mutawazin zindagi.
A balanced life. But again, balance here doesn't just mean work-life balance or moderation in eating. It implies a center of gravity. It means a life where your internal world is strictly aligned with permanent values. It requires active alignment with divine codes.
Why divine codes, though? Why can't I just align with my own personal code, my own truth?
The source argues that you cannot achieve integration by following your own whims because your whims are constantly changing. They are subjective. Today you want X, tomorrow you want Y, depending on your mood, your blood sugar, or what you saw on social media. If you follow whims, you become a weather vane, spinning in the wind. A weather vane has no autonomy, it just reacts.
That's a great analogy. To be autonomous, you actually have to be able to stand against the wind. So you need an external anchor. You need an objective standard.
Exactly. That is where the divine law comes in. It provides the measure, or the kadra, which we will get to later, that allows you to construct a straight wall. If you build a wall by eye, it'll be crooked. If you use a plumb line, it stands straight. Mitwazin Zindagi is living by the plumb line.
And the payoff for that.
The source is very clear on this. The result isn't just a reward in the afterlife. It starts here. In this world, life becomes harmonious. You stop fighting yourself. You achieve internal peace. And in the hereafter, that self you built is strong enough to survive the transition to the next stage of evolution.
That is a perfect segue, because to build this self, you need clear blueprints. You need facts, not fairy tales. If you're trying to build a skyscraper using a blueprint drawn in crayon by a toddler, it's going to fall down. And this brings us to part 2 of our roadmap, deconstructing myths.
This is where Purvey puts on his detective hat.
The source material spends a significant amount of time tearing apart a very specific story found in traditional commentaries on Surah al-Baqarah, the story of Harut and Marut.
This is a fascinating example of how the rationalist framework operates. So let's look at the context. It's verse 102 of Surah al-Baqarah. The verse mentions Babylon, it mentions King Solomon, and it mentions these two names, Harut and Marut.
Let's have the traditional story first, the one the source calls nonsense and folklore.
The traditional myth, which the source identifies as having infiltrated Islamic thought from Jewish folklore or Talmudic roots, goes like this. 2 angels, Harut and Marut, were up in heaven looking down at humanity. They saw humans sinning, stealing, killing, and they criticized them. They said, "Lord, how can you tolerate these creatures?"
It's a very judgmental start for angels.
Right. And God said, "If you were down there subjected to the same drives and temptations, you'd do the same." The angel said, "No, we wouldn't. We are here." So God said, "Okay, prove it." He sent them down to Babylon in human form. And surprise, surprise, they didn't last long.
They fell off the wagon immediately.
Immediately, they got involved with a beautiful woman, they drank wine, and to cover up their sins, they committed murder, the standard fallen angel trope.
And what happened to them?
The story goes that as punishment, they were hung upside down in a well in Babylon. And this is the key part. People would go to this well to learn magic from them. Specifically, magic that could cause a rift between a husband and wife.
I have heard versions of this story. It's very dramatic. It has romance, murder, magic, fallen angels. It's like a premium cable television series. But our source, Ghulam Ahmad Pervez, absolutely destroys this narrative. He doesn't just disagree with it, he calls it kurafat, fables and superstitions.
He is scathing about it. He asks us a very simple question. Does this story fit the character of the Quran? His argument is textual and rational. He says, look at the Quran. The Quran mentions the story only to refute it. The source argues that the Quran is clearing Solomon's name, saying he did not practice magic, he did not disbelieve.
And regarding Harut and Marut,
the source interprets them not as fallen angels hanging in a well, which is physically absurd, but as symbolic figures, or perhaps human agents who were testing the people. The source emphasizes that the Quran explicitly says these figures warned people, saying, "We are a trial, so do not disbelieve."
that's a huge logical hole in the myth. A fallen angel who is teaching you black magic wouldn't say, hey, by the way, don't disbelieve. They would want you to disbelieve.
Exactly. Perez argues that the Quran is an anti-superstition book. It is a book of reason. It would never validate the idea that you can go to a well and learn magic spells to ruin a marriage. He argues that magic, charms, amulets, all of this is contrary to the din, the system of Islam.
There is a really interesting so what here. Why does he spend so much time debunking this specific story? It's not just about correcting a historical footnote. There is an economic angle mentioned in the source that I found totally fascinating.
Oh, this is where it gets really sharp. The source notes that religious figures, the priestly class, if you will, have historically used these myths to maintain power. Think about the economics of superstition. If people believe in magic, they believe they are vulnerable to invisible attacks. My business failed because of magic. My wife left me because of a spell.
If you believe in the disease, you need to buy the cure.
Exactly. And who sells the protection? The religious leaders. They sell charms, they sell Taoist amulets, they sell spiritual cures to ward off the magic of Harut and Marut. It's a protection racket.
So by debunking the myth, Pervez is also attacking the revenue stream of superstition.
Precisely. He says they are trading the hereafter for a small price in this world. If you tell people your problems aren't caused by magic, they're caused by your own lack of character, your own bad decisions, or simple cause and effect, you can't sell them a charm. You force them to take responsibility.
And taking responsibility is the first step to care. It's the first step to autonomy.
You see how it all connects? Magic makes you a victim of invisible forces. Rationalism makes you the master of your own choices. You can't be an architect of the self if you think a wizard can knock your building down with a spell.
That is a profound point. Rationalism is a prerequisite for moral accountability. Now that demand for consistency, that the Quran is rational, consistent, and not full of fairy tales, leads us directly into the biggest controversy in the source material. This is part 3, the controversy of abrogation, or nask.
Oh boy, this one is heavy. This is the third rail of Islamic theology.
Let's set the scene for you listening. What is the traditional view of nask that the source is fighting against?
The traditional view, which has been held by many scholars for centuries, is that the Quran was revealed over a period of 23 years. And sometimes, they argue, a later verse would come down and cancel out or invalidate an earlier verse.
So verse A says, do this, and then a few years later, verse B says, actually don't do that, do this instead. And verse A is considered abrogated. It's still in the book, we still read it, but it's legally dead. It have no force.
Yes. The source mentions that some classical scholars claimed up to 500 verses were abrogated.
500 verses, that is a huge chunk of the text.
It's massive. Later scholars like Shah Waliullah tried to minimize this, reducing it to 5 verses. But the principle remained. The idea that God gave a command, realized it wasn't working or the situation changed, and sent a correction slip.
A correction slip, that is the exact phrase the source uses. It sounds like a human legislature passing an amendment to a bill because the first draft had a massive loophole. Oh, we didn't foresee this tax issue, let's pass an amendment.
And that is exactly why Pervez rejects it. His core argument is theological. He asks, who is God? God is Alim, all-knowing, and Hakim, all-wise. Does an all-knowing entity make a plan that needs a correction slip 5 years later?
The source brings in the concept of time here. It references the philosopher Iqbal talking about the eternal now. It blew my mind a little bit.
It's deep philosophy. For humans, time is linear. Past, present, future. We learn things sequentially. We try something, we fail, we learn, we fix it, we make a law, we see it fail, we repeal it. That's the human experience. But for God, the source argues, past, present, and future are a single moment, an eternal now.
So God sees the entire timeline of humanity at once.
Exactly. He sees the beginning and the end. Therefore, he doesn't react to changing circumstances by changing his mind. He would have known the circumstances beforehand. If God changes his mind, it implies he learned something he didn't know before, and that contradicts the definition of God.
So based on this, Pervez argues that no verse in the Quran abrogates another. Not a single one.
Not one. He calls the traditional doctrine of abrogation a great injustice to the Quran. He says it implies that the book is full of contradictions that had to be fixed by the author halfway through.
But, and here's the counter-argument, the word nashk is in the Quran. Verse 106 of al-Baqarah says, we do not abrogate a verse or cause it to be forgotten except that we bring one better than it or similar to it. If it doesn't mean canceling verses within the Quran, what does it mean?
This is the pivot. Pervez redefines nash. He says the verses being abrogated here aren't Quranic verses. They are the verses of previous scriptures.
Oh, so it's not the Quran correcting itself, it's the Quran correcting the Torah or the Gospel.
Exactly. The source argues that nash means replacement or transcribing, like copying a manuscript to a new, better edition. The argument is that previous revelations were time-bound. They were for a specific people, like the Israelites, at a specific time. When the Quran came, it abrogated those temporary laws and replaced them with permanent, universal laws.
So the correction is between dispensations, not within the final dispensation.
Right. It's an upgrade from version 1.0 to version 2.0. You don't keep using version 1.0 code in version 2.0, but version 2.0 itself doesn't have bugs that need patching.
That makes a lot of logical sense, but can we give a concrete example? The source mentions the will versus inheritance. This is a classic case study in Islamic law, and I think it
Yeah.
illustrates the problem perfectly.
It is the most famous one. Here is the conflict. The Quran has a verse that commands believers to make a will, a wasiyat, for their parents and relatives before they die. It's framed as a duty. It is prescribed for you when death approaches to make a bequest.
Okay, simple enough. Write a will, decide who gets your stuff.
But then, later in Surah an-Nisa, there are verses that detail specific inheritance shares. The son gets this much, the daughter gets this much, the mother gets this much. It's a mathematical formula.
So we have a write a will command and a here's the formula command.
Traditional jurisprudence argues that these inheritance verses abrogated the will verse. They say you cannot make a will for an heir because the fixed shares took care of it. They essentially say, ignore the command to write a will for your heirs. God did the math for you.
So the verse about the will is considered operative text. We recite it, but inoperative law. It's
Okay.
shelved.
Yes. But Pervez says absolutely not. Both are valid. He argues for a harmonious application. He says you must make a will. The will allows you to address specific needs within your family. Maybe one child is disabled and needs more support. Maybe a parent is destitute. Maybe one son is already a millionaire and doesn't need the money.
That's where the autonomy comes in.
Yes, you have the autonomy, the ikhtiar, to distribute your wealth to help your family based on the specific reality of your situation.
And what about the fixed shares?
The fixed shares apply to the surplus or if no will is made, or they serve as a boundary to ensure fairness. But the point is, he refuses to shelve the verse about the will. He says there is no contradiction. One is discretionary, which is autonomy, and the other is the default framework. By using abrogation, we lost the flexibility and autonomy that Quran intended to give us.
It really does come back to autonomy. If you follow the traditional view, the system is rigid. Math does the distribution for you. You don't have to think. If you follow Pervez's view, you are responsible for deciding how to best support your family through your will. You have to be a sahibi ikhtiyar.
And that responsibility is heavy. It's easier to just let the math do it. It's harder to sit down and say who needs what is fair. But that hardness is what builds the self. That hardness is care.
This connects perfectly to the next section of our roadmap. We've talked about upgrading from version 1.0 to version 2.0. Why did things change? Why did we have different laws in the past? This brings us to part 4, the evolution of guidance. The source uses a really charming analogy about childhood and adulthood.
This is the evolutionary theory of guidance. The source argues that humanity has gone through developmental stages just like a single human being does.
Let's talk about the childhood phase. The source uses Noah as the prime example.
Yes. Think about the story of Noah. He is told to build an ark. The source emphasizes that God had to give him extremely specific, micromanaged instructions. Put a plank here, use a nail here, make it this wide, this high. Every single detail was revealed.
Why? Was Noah not smart? Was he incompetent?
It's not about intelligence, it's about the collective intellectual maturity of the human race at that time. The source calls it the childhood of humanity. Think about a toddler. A child needs detailed SOPs, standard operating procedures. You tell a toddler, pick up the spoon, hold it like this, put it in your mouth, chew, swallow.
You don't just say nourish yourself.
Exactly, because they don't have the capacity to interpret nourish yourself. They need the mechanics. They need the micromanagement. So previous prophets came with strict codes, rituals, and detailed instructions because humanity needed that structure. They needed a parent holding their hand to walk them to school.
But then we reach the time of the final revelation. The source says this marks the adulthood of humanity.
The age of reason. The analogy shifts. An adult doesn't need you to hold their hand to walk to the market. If you want an adult to go to a destination, the source uses the local example of Anarkali Market or Ferozepur Road in Lahore. You just need a signpost.
A signpost.
Yes, the signpost points the way. It gives the principle, go north. It doesn't tell you, lift your left foot, now lift your right foot, watch out for that puddle, turn 30 degrees. It assumes you have the intellect to navigate the terrain.
So the Quran, in this view, is a book of signposts. It is a book of principles.
Precisely. And this resolves the tension between permanence and change. The source discusses this beautiful blend. The principles are permanent, justice is permanent, truth is permanent, consultation, or shura, is permanent. But the application, the details of how you achieve justice in the 7th century versus the 21st century, that changes.
And because humanity is now adult, we are entrusted with the autonomy to figure out the application.
Yes. If the Quran gave micromanaged details for everything, how to drive a car, how to regulate the internet, how to perform heart surgery, it would become obsolete as soon as society changed. By giving principles, it forces us to use our intellect. It forces us to be autonomous agents applying the law.
It's a call to intellectual arms. It's saying God trusts you to figure this out using the brain he gave you. If we just blindly follow a rigid list of 7th century details without understanding the principle, we are acting like children in an adult world. We are refusing to grow up.
Which brings us to the nature of the God who is trusting us. This is part 5. The nature of God. Because if God is an architect and we are apprentice architects, we need to understand his style. We need to talk about the word Qadir.
Qadir.
Yeah.
It's usually translated as all-powerful. And commonly when people say Allah is Qadir, they mean God can do whatever he wants. He can make 2 + 2 = 5 if he wants. It can be arbitrary. He can be whimsical.
The Ranjit Singh figure, as the source humorously notes, Ranjit Singh was a Sikh ruler known for sometimes arbitrary decrees. The source rejects this image of God completely. It argues that Qadir does not mean arbitrary power. It comes from the root qadr.
Qadr means measure or standard.
Yes. So God is Qadir because he is the great measurer. He is the architect who sets measures and laws for everything. He isn't a chaotic force. He is the source of order.
The source uses scientific examples here to prove this point.
It does. It points to water. H2O. God established a measure. 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen makes water. He doesn't wake up one day and decide, you know what, today water will be made of nitrogen and lead. No. The laws of physics are consistent. That consistency is qadr.
And there is a Taylor analogy.
Taqdir. The word taqdir, which people usually translate as fate or destiny, actually comes from the same root. It is linked to a tailor cutting cloth to a specific measure to fit a body. It's about precision.
So Taqdir isn't a blind fate written in the stars. It's the specific law or measure assigned to an object.
Exactly. The taqdir of fire is to burn. The taqdir of water is to flow. The insight here is profound. If God acts according to his own established laws in the physical universe, which is Sunat Allah, why would he act chaotically in the religious or social universe?
He wouldn't. Therefore, his religious laws must be systematic. They must be rational, cause and effect.
Exactly. If you put your hand in fire, it burns. That is a physical law. The source argues that moral laws are just as rigid. If you engage in shar, disintegration, your personality crumbles. God doesn't decide to punish you arbitrarily like an angry king. The punishment is a natural consequence of the law, just like the burn is a consequence of the fire.
That makes the universe feel much more understandable. It's not a lottery. It's a system. If I build the wall wrong, it falls. It's not because the architect hates me. It's because I ignored the laws of gravity.
It is a system, and the goal of navigating this system is the evolution of the self. This leads us to the ultimate question. Where is this all going? What happens when we die? Part 6. The hereafter.
The source is very specific here. It doesn't describe the hereafter as a static place where you just sit around eating grapes and relaxing. It describes it as an evolutionary stage.
This connects back to the very beginning. Remember the self, the zat. The source argues that the human self is like an embryo.
I love this analogy. Break it down for us.
Think about a baby in the womb. In the womb, an embryo develops organs. Eyes, ears, lungs. Now, does the baby need lungs in the womb? No. It gets oxygen through the umbilical cord. If a baby could talk, it might say, why am I building these sponge things in my chest? I don't use them.
Right. They're completely useless in the current environment.
But the embryo develops them for the next stage of life, for the world of air. If the embryo fails to develop lungs, what happens when it is born?
It can't breathe. It dies. Or it suffers immensely.
Exactly. So this world we are in right now is the womb for the hereafter.
Whoa, so we are in the womb right now.
We are in the womb, and the organ we are developing here isn't physical, it is the integrated self, it is autonomy. If you develop a strong integrated self in this world by following care, you survive the birth of death. You are viable in the next environment.
And if you don't, if you live a life of char and disintegration,
then you are like an embryo that failed to develop lungs. You cannot breathe in the next stage. The source implies a cessation of evolution or a painful existence of incompleteness. You simply didn't build the equipment necessary to exist in that higher reality.
But for those who survive, the description is beautiful. The source says they become a sahibi ikhtiar in the next life.
This is the most surprising part for me. Usually we think of heaven as a place of retirement. a place of eternal rest. The source says no. The fully integrated self is entrusted with even greater powers, greater choices, and greater will.
So the reward for handling power well in this life is more power in the next.
Yes, it is an expansion of agency. You become a co-worker in the divine creative process on a higher plane. It's not about losing yourself in God. It's about yourself becoming robust enough to handle eternity. It's an evolutionary leap in autonomy.
That is a staggering thought. It turns life into a training ground for cosmic responsibility. It raises the stakes enormously. It's not just about being good so I don't get grounded. It's I need to build my capacity so I can function in the next reality.
Exactly. But, and here's the catch, and it's a big one, the source says you cannot do this training alone. You cannot go to a mountaintop and meditate your way to this integration. This brings us to part 7, collective discipline.
The Jamaat, the society.
The source is adamant. Autonomy requires a disciplined society. You cannot develop a self in a vacuum because self is defined by how it interacts with others.
The source distinguishes between a crowd, a Jami'anan, and a society with connected hearts. What's the difference?
A crowd is just people standing near each other. You are in a crowd at a concert or a market, but a Jamaat has a shared heartbeat. It shares permanent values. It has a shared goal. And here is the hard part for modern individualists, and I think this will sting a little for some of us.
Give it to us.
The source warns strictly against demanding special favors.
Make an exception for me. I know the rule is X, but I'm special.
Right. I know the rules say wait in line, but can I cut in just this once? The source says that if individuals demand personal exemptions, the social order disintegrates. And remember, care is stability. Shar is disintegration. If the society disintegrates, the individuals within it disintegrate.
It's a feedback loop.
Yes, you end up with a split society which creates split personalities. If you live in a chaotic, lawless society, it is very hard to maintain internal integration. You are constantly forced to compromise your values just to survive.
So obeying the collective order, even when it's inconvenient, is actually an act of self-integration. It's discipline.
It is the surrender of the petty will, the will that wants to cut the line to build the great will. It's the paradox of autonomy. You become free by voluntarily binding yourself to a higher law.
This has been a massive journey. We've gone from the definition of a single word, care, all the way to the evolution of the soul in the hereafter. Let's try to summarize this rationalist framework for you listening.
Sure. Let's look at the arc we just traced. First, goodness is power. The goal of life is to build a strong, integrated self that can make autonomous choices.
Second, evil is disintegration. Bad actions fracture your personality, making you weak and indecisive.
Third, myth is poison. Superstitions like Harut and Marut weaken your reason and make you dependent on priests.
Fourth, no contradictions. The Quran is a consistent, rational document. It doesn't abrogate itself. It replaces the old, temporary laws of the past with universal principles.
Fifth, God is an architect. He is not a tyrant. He acts through systematic laws.
Sixth, the future is evolution. We are preparing ourselves for a higher stage of agency in the hereafter.
And finally, we need each other. This growth only happens in a disciplined, cohesive society.
It is a framework that demands a lot from the believer. It doesn't offer easy shortcuts. It doesn't offer magic charms. It offers responsibility.
It offers the dignity of adulthood. It treats the human being as a responsible agent capable of understanding the mind of the architect. And honestly, that is more terrifying than magic, but it is also more inspiring.
It's empowering. And that leads us to our final thought for the listener. We always like to leave you with something to chew on.
Here's the question I'm left with, and I want you to ask yourself this. If the hereafter is an evolutionary stage where you are entrusted with more power and more choice, look at your life right now. Look at your daily decisions. Are you building a personality that is strong enough to handle eternity? Or are you too fragmented, too indecisive, and too double-minded to even handle today?
A heavy question, but a necessary one. Are you building a rock, or are you a pile of sand? That's it for this deep dive into the architect of autonomy. Thank you for listening.
See you next time.
Goodbye.